forward to my favorite part of the program, where we have the featured guest speaker, Dale Caldwell. Very excited to have him here. He's been here, done a workshop. People loved his workshop. Loved what he shared, actually used what he shared in their businesses. So we wanted to invite him back as a featured guest speaker so he can share with even more people and really go into a little bit more than he did before. Dale's done so many tremendous things. He's been top CEO, president, executive director of more than 10 organizations in different industries. So that's a huge accomplishment, and there's a lot of knowledge there. So we're going to sit back, enjoy what Dale is bringing to us, and I'd like to invite Dale Caldwell.
So that's a nice way of saying I'm old. Right? So it's just great hearing all the background. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hearing everybody's background. So I feel every one of you could get up here and talk about this. But what I want to do is share a new way to look at yourself, a new way to look at your business, a new way to look at human interaction. That I don't like to call myself a motivational speaker. I don't like to call myself a motivational speaker as much as someone that gets you to think very differently. So that when you leave this, I like to provide a tool for folks. So when you leave here, you'll have some things that you actually can use in your personal life, in your professional life, going forward. And so the concept of the title of the presentation is called Intelligent Influence. And I'll talk a little bit about how I came to that. Let's see here. Several years ago, as I was I've written a couple books, I was looking at this idea of leadership and came up with this idea called Intelligent Influence, and I've trademarked this concept. And it really is built around the single thing that's most important in the world, and really in your life, in what you do and how you become successful. So to begin, I like to say, influence is a word that's hidden in plain sight. And so often we hear that word, yet we don't really think about it. And so let me just hear from you. What does influence mean? Just shout out. What does influence mean to anybody in this room?
Ability to persuade.
Ability to persuade. Excellent, excellent. Any other comments? Any other comments? Ability to get people to do things that you want them to do, right? So, one of the things that we think about is that we know and we hear that so-and-so is influential, and you watch the evening newscast and they'll say that he's influential or she's influential, yet nobody really thinks about what that means. They kind of take that word for granted. And so one of the ways I began by getting you to think about that is if you thought about the business leader or the inventor or the product or the corporation who's been most influential. Let me hear a couple of any one of those on the list. A couple of names.
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, yep.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. What about product?
Apple.
The Apple products. Samsung. And so what if we have more time, what we would do is unpack why, and you'll find there are influences in your life that get you to think what's most influential. And so we'd unpack that. So given that, what's our time? When should I always try to be on time? It's 9:16 now. 30 minutes, perfect. Okay, great. All right. So several years ago, as you heard, I wrote this book called Intelligent Influence. And I have just been overwhelmed by the positive response I've gotten to this book. I've been told it's really changed people's lives. It's changed how they've interacted in their relationships. It's changed how they've grown their business. It's changed how they've approached the market. So one of the things I realized years ago, Carl Sagan, the late scientist, and several other people came up with this idea of if the history of the universe were a year, where would various events fall? So you look at the Big Bang, if there was such a thing, it would have been January 1st. Earth would have come into formation about September 25th, but human beings would be on Earth December 31st around 10 p.m. And the reason I say this is that we think we're so advanced as a society, but when it comes to human interaction, we're in our infancy stages. And this whole framework on influence is a new way to look at human interaction we can fly around the world, we have technology that can do all sorts of things, yet we really can't relate to people. As we talk, you look at the global chaos in the world, there's a reason why that happens. It's because we're at a very early stage in our development. So, several years ago, about 5 years ago, I was going to write a book on leadership. There are a million books on leadership, but mine was going to be the best. I was going to be, an all-star. And I began by looking up Webster's definition of the words leadership, command, and authority. And I was amazed to find that the word influence was in each one of those definitions. So it set me on this path to start thinking about this thing called influence. And one of the things that I discovered, it's a word that's hidden in plain sight. As I said earlier, is that people say he's influential, she's influential. Those in the internet space say that Lady Gaga is influential because she has so many Facebook friends and so on. Yet we really don't define what that really means. Yet in reality, we do what we do, think the way we think, and accomplish what we accomplish because of influence. And we'll talk a little more about that. And some people will say, well, Dale, maybe it's not that important. And the example I use are accents. Is that no child is born with an accent. The child could be born in Brooklyn, the child could be born in the Bronx, the child could be born in London, the child could be born in Johannesburg, South Africa. They develop an accent. And guess what? Those accents stay with them for the rest of their life. So if you're influenced to have an accent, imagine all the other things that you're influenced to do. You're influenced to think about your politics. You're influenced based on your favorite sport or sport team. You're influenced to who or what you think is attractive. And so, we need to begin that and understand and unpack that, and that really set me on this path to develop this process. One of the other things I like to make this controversial statement that I know what the best music in the world is. Right? I know what the best music in the world is. If we had an open debate, everybody would be arguing, about their type of music. And the reason is that the best music in the world is the music you heard between 10 and 20. Right? So those in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, doesn't mean you don't like other things, but that was music that influenced you during a very important, influential time in your life. So when you start thinking about influences, and you'll find this applies to your business as well, it changes your mindset. So my influences. So this is my dad on the left, who is retired, lives in Asbury Park, and he and my mom are taking care of my 10-year-old daughter. Ralph Abernathy, Dr. King's right-hand man, and Dr. King. And so this is 1965, and they were organizing a march to integrate the Boston public schools. And so, I had a chance to go to Princeton undergrad. I got an MBA in finance from Wharton, and so a lot of my classmates were making millions on Wall Street. I was pulled to kind of get active in urban communities. And I also was pulled to really understand this idea of influence, because if you think about the civil rights movement, that wasn't a corporation. That wasn't a political office. They influenced society to change. And so as we think about how we move things and how we influence as a business, it's very much the same way. Yet so often we try to put our business under a different kind of construct. So there are two types, and one of the things, and I really, as Andrew may have mentioned, so I'm also, I have my own consulting firm. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Strategic Influence, where we use this framework to do leadership, corporate strategy, we do coaching. But I want it to be, a lot of people come up with frameworks, Stephen Covey and Daniel Goleman and others, and they talk about their framework. What I wanted to do is take the framework and actually apply it. So I actually interviewed for the Trenton superintendent position. And now if you have leadership experience, you can actually run a troubled school district. And to my surprise, as a non-certified person, I actually finished second. I was the leading candidate, but the union didn't want a business person coming in and telling them what to do. And that led to me being asked to lead something called the Village Charter School in Trenton. And so it's 95% African American, same kids that go to the Trenton Public Schools. And I'm taking this intelligent influence process and using that to turn the school around. And probably will write a book about it called Intelligent Influence in Education. So one of the reasons that you say, well, why is this guy leading the school if he's doing this strategy thing? But I want to apply this to change the lives of young people. And I really believe that if you understand influence, you'll understand that. And the final thing I'll say about education is, one of the things I've learned is that the name teacher is really it's a misnomer. It's a bad name. Because what happens is so many teachers teach to the curriculum and say, well, I taught, it's your job to learn. Instead, they're really influencers, because the good teachers make sure that every one of the kids are influenced to want to learn.
Absolutely.
And it's a total different mindset. And so again, this idea of influence is so critical in what we do in society at every level of society. But there are really two different types of influence. And so most of my talk in business has been about social influence, about how society and other things have influenced how we are as business people and where we do and what we do, and whether we're engineers or salespeople or HR people. But recently, and it really hit home in Trenton, I'm on the school board in New Brunswick and other areas, is that there's something that I'm coining called neuro-influence. And then what I've learned is that I used to think that if you grew up in a tough neighborhood, you actually were tougher. What happens is you're less tough. You are more skittish. You are more sensitive to problems. And what happens is your brain, the amygdala in your brain, which controls feeling, changes. It changes in size. So when you hear about those kids that just kill other people indiscriminately, it's actually a physiological change in their brain. The good news is that the right type of positive emotional influence can change that. So music programs, mentoring programs, even sports programs and other things can actually help. And unfortunately, public policy doesn't apply to that. So this idea of neuro-influence is really a critically important thing, and I wrote some articles about something called urban traumatic stress disorder. And so the reason I came is that I did the leadership retreat for the new mayor of Newark and his cabinet a few weeks ago. And I was talking to Roz, and I was saying about this post-traumatic stress disorder, and he goes, well, Dale, it's not post, it's current. And so it really set me on this path to really understand this idea of neuroinfluence. And so that's important for you to understand because many of you have experienced certain traumas in your life that impact how sensitive you are to other people. And it's important to know that, and if you haven't, there are other people who have. So this idea of social influence and neuroinfluence is critically important. So let's jump into it. And so please, this is, if you have any questions or you disagree or anything, please raise your hand. I want to make sure that that this is as much a dialogue as you want it to be. So this idea of influence is, the case was made by this guy called Malcolm Gladwell. How many of you read Malcolm Gladwell's books? Best-selling New York Times author. His books, The Tipping Point, Blink, and Outliers, really resonated. He doesn't overtly say it's about influence, but each one of those is about influence. So The Tipping Point talks about trends, talks about the influences that make something very, very popular. Blink talks about the influences in our lives that get us instantaneously to make judgments of other people without even knowing about it. But my favorite was Outliers, and the reason I like it is because it exploded the myth of the self-made man. That America is built around this idea that you need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, and if you don't do it, you're less than other people. And so they start the book talking about hockey players in Canada. And they did a study and found out that the best hockey players, the ones that go to the NHL, were born in January, February, March, or April. Anybody know why? What? Weather. No. Yeah, well, they were bigger. Well, see, what happens is they were bigger. And so they were bigger, so they got more attention. They were better early on, and they continue to get more attention throughout their career. So if you were a talented player born in December, you might have made it, but the odds were against you making it. So again, that's that influence, that's social influence, and that actually, someone did the study. Malcolm talked about the study, someone else did it, but a lot of people now are holding their kids back. They want their kids, especially boys, to be the oldest kids in their grade. My daughter happens to be the youngest kid in her grade, and there's some good and bad about that. But what really got me is they talked about the icons of American business, Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison of Oracle, and Bill Gates. They said, well, these are the superior human beings. They're just smarter than everybody. They walk on water. They were just born, from another planet. Well, what they did is they did a study and realized that they were born between 1952 and 1959, and they had influence, and they had access to technology and were influenced it well before in a more intense way than other people. So when they were 18, they were doing things on the internet before anybody even knew what it was. So they had those advantages. There were people who were smarter than them and harder working who were born before or born after. So one of the important messages of all of this is that it's all about influence, and that you shouldn't limit the influence in your own life, that you actually can be what you want to be. Don't think that, well, they're just better than me. But there's influence in their lives that gave them that opportunity. So that's something, a mindset that I want you to think about as we kind of get into this. All right, so this is the framework, and it's really less complicated than it looks. So this is called internal influence, or how you've been influenced. This is called external influence, or how you influence other people. These are influence understanding. One, understanding how you've been influenced and how you influence other people. And these are influence actions, what you do about it. So let's go through each one. So first is influence awareness, and this is critically important. I talked a little bit about this, and when we have more time, we actually go through this. You need to understand who's influenced you in the past. How have they influenced you? What impact has their influence had on you? I would suspect that, and I would guarantee that every one of you is sitting here because someone influenced you in your life to do what you're currently doing. And those influences aren't always positive. Sometimes they're negative. You know, I just facilitated a retreat for the Newark Economic Development Group, and we were talking, and several people said, well, I was influenced because I didn't want to be like my mom. I was going to be a good mom. I was going to be there for my daughter. I was going to be for my kids. And so I made sure of that commitment. Whereas other people said, one guy said, there was this guy, Jim Robinson in New York, I'd be in prison now if he didn't change my life, and I'm making sure I'm changing hundreds of other kids' lives. So it's important for each of you to really begin to and one of the things I learned when I was at Deloitte Consulting for 11 years is nothing exists till you write it down. So one of the things in your private moments is to really think about those influences and write down who they are. And if the person or people are still alive, I encourage people to send an email to them and say, you know, this guy was talking about influence. I just want to say thank you. You've been a big influence in my life. And that's an important thing for them, but it's also an important thing for you. So that's the first step. The second step of this, and I'll explain how this applies to business and what you do, is to really do some soul searching and say, are my perspectives reinforced because I'm hanging around these people who've been influenced the same way I am? So what happens in the big corporate context is engineers are hanging with engineers, and salespeople are hanging with salespeople, and HR people are with HR people, and finance people are with finance people. Yet, if you look at CEOs aren't necessarily the brightest lights in the tent, right? But they're people who can go to each one of those divisions and be very comfortable in them. That they can talk to finance, and they can talk to sales, and they can talk to HR. Well, you have to be able to do that. One of our problems that we just went through this election is you have, in Washington, you have liberals telling each other they're brilliant, and conservatives telling each other they're brilliant, and nobody's talking. They're reinforcing this idea that I'm better than they are. And that's why our government is in chaos. And so it's important for us to begin to think about that. Now, the hardest part about this is that it's not enough to just spend time. And so I've encouraged people, if you know somebody you don't like, spend time with them. Not just time and say, you know, how's your day? And, you know, I often say, people say, how's your day? And most people really don't care. You know, you can play a little game when they say, how's your day? And then you say, I'm glad you asked. You had 10 minutes. You know, I have a horrible day. That nobody wants to hear you going through that, right? Right? So one of the most powerful questions that I found is when you're with somebody is to say, who's been the biggest influence in your life? That changes your relationship instantaneously because one, you care enough about that person to hear that. But two, I will guarantee you will learn something about them. Now, in the context of customer base, I talk to some of the customers. I talk to some people that don't buy from you and say, who've been the biggest influences in your life? To really understand why they don't use your services. And though they're influence-based reasons, see, one of the things that we don't realize is that we're all products of our influence. And when we're arguing, when we're doing something, there are a whole bunch of influences in our head making us do those things. And until we understand ourselves, those influences, we really can't begin to understand other people's influences. So that's step one, influence awareness. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, the next one is what we call influence impact, to understand how are you currently influencing other people. So this is how have you been influenced, this is how you influence other people. So there's 6 types of intelligent influence. There are a whole bunch of types of influence. You know, fear, there's negative influence, Hitler was influential, there are all sorts of things. One of the good things about bad influence is that it's not sustainable. If you have an abusive boss, you're not going to stay in that job for a long time, right? But intelligent influence is sustainable because what you're doing is you're getting people to want to work with you. You're getting people who want to be influenced by you. You're getting people that want to be on your team, to buy from your services, to buy your products. So the 6 types are authority, belief, inspiration, reputation, resource, and thought. And so we'll go through this. So the first is authority influence, and this is the easiest one to understand because everybody understands if you're a CEO, you have influence. The trouble is most people think this is the only type of influence, is that I'm President of the United States, so I have influence. And so one of the interesting things that we do, we'll do a 360, an influence 360. Are you familiar with 360s? You know, where you talk to the individual, you talk to their boss, you talk to their coworkers, and you talk to the people who work for you. So oftentimes people will say, I ask, how often do you utilize your position to direct the actions of others? People don't really know. Do I really have authority influence? And they say, oh, I'm always giving direction. So I have a lot of authority influence. Well, their boss, you ask their boss and say, he never gives direction. Right? You ask their coworkers, I don't know. And you ask the people who work for me, he gives too much direction. So this really, and at the end of the day, all that matters is how you influence other people. And I often ask the question, what's more important, influence or the quality of your work? Well, it's really influence. And the example I use is the 3-day rule. Is that I have 2 people reporting to me, and the guy says, and they both know they're doing the same project, they both know it's going to take about 3 days. The guy says, there are more women here, so I got to make the woman look better. So the guy says, I'm going to get it to you in 2 days. And the woman says, I'm going to get it to you in 4 days. And they both turn the exact same product in 3 days. Guess who gets the praise and guess who gets the blame? Right, the 2-day person said, well, where was it? The 4-day person said, thanks for getting it early. Same quality work, it didn't matter. And so one of the things we're doing is working with people to have, so if I do a project for Michelle, Gabriella Designs, and she doesn't like it and I like it and we start arguing, I take it very personally that she doesn't like my product. But if she says, Dale, how could you have influenced me better? Then I'm not defensive because I know I need to understand, I need to present it in a different way. I should have written it in a different way. And so this whole idea when you have conflict is to understand, because it's all about influence. Yet we focus on the product instead of how we're influencing other people, and it makes those difficult discussions that much better. So authority influence, does that make sense? Okay. So next one is belief influence. And these are, there's belief, and the next one you'll see is inspiration. And there are nuances that sometimes it's hard for people to understand, but these are very, very, very different. So one is belief influence. Influence derived by appealing to the common beliefs or faith of others. And Jeff Bezos, what did he found? Amazon. And so I'm putting these Princeton people up there because they were at Princeton the same time. And they're billionaires and I'm not. So, he's an engineer. He's a guy, he's not a gregarious guy, he's not an outgoing guy. He's gotten a lot better if you've seen him on TV than when he was at Princeton or at Wall Street. But he got people to believe in this stupid concept of putting your credit card on the internet to buy books. You say, well, it was brilliant back then. But back then, anybody who did it, and now with all the security breaches, people are rethinking that. But, he got people to believe in this concept. And so certain people are influenced by people who get them to believe, to get them to really believe in this product. As opposed to Richard Branson, who founded the Virgin companies, right? So he's an inspirational guy. He's a guy that puts his life on the line. He's a guy that people will follow. They don't care what he's selling. They will follow him. He's an inspirational leader. You say, well, everybody should love inspiration. No, a lot of people think they're too salesy. I don't trust him. I don't trust him because he's selling me. They need to work with the Jeff Bezos of the world, because you're going to have to tell them whether you're selling a product or not is that the quality of this product is so good you need to buy it. Not that, I'm just a great salesman, be part of our team because we're going to the moon, we're going to do this stuff. So you need to understand that nuance from a coworker base to a customer base. And so often what the mistake that we make is we try to lead everybody the same way or sell to everybody the same way. And the reason everybody's different is because of the influences in their life. So, does that make sense, those two? Inspiration, belief. And sometimes people say, well, what's the difference between belief and inspiration? And when they say that, it's very clear that they don't understand that there is a very, very big difference between the two, because people respond very, very differently. The next is reputation influence. And James Burke, anybody know James Burke? And most people don't, because it was a while ago, but he's probably one of the most iconic CEOs in history. He was the CEO of J&J during the Caldwell crisis. And so actually in my book, I talk a chapter about that. And what he did is he took the credo of J&J and put the company on the line if you remember, Tylenol was laced with cyanide poisoning. And 12 people died, and they knew it wasn't the company's fault. So he could have come out, as some CEOs today would say, well, it's not our fault. We really feel for the families, but it's not our fault. So we're going to continue to sell. Instead, what he did is he took Tylenol off the marketplace around the world, risking billions for the benefit of customers. And yet what that did is make J&J one of the most respected brands in the world. So they more than made the money that they would have lost, that they lost in doing that. They also are the ones who changed the packaging. And so that reputation is so important. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do is what the late Mayor Ed Koch used to do and say, how am I doing? And, in New York City, when you do that, Mayor Koch is from Newark, He went to Shabazz. And so when you do that, New Yorkers are going to tell you, right? And so you need to do that with your coworkers. You need to do that with your customers. And the thing is, I've never heard of an occasion when you do that, even with somebody doesn't like you, where they just take that chance to kind of slap you over the face and just beat you up. They respect the fact that you want to know how you feel they're doing. And guess what? That's valuable information. And you don't want it from people that love you. You want it from people that don't buy from you. So how am I doing? What am I not doing to get your business? It's okay to have that conversation. But instead, we don't do that and we assume, well, they just don't like me. They just don't like my company, or they love this other company. So this whole idea of reputation, so one of the things in the workplace I ask people to say, how often do people tell you that they've heard wonderful things about you? That's your test of your reputation. So if no one ever says that, then you want to make sure that people are saying, or customers again, are saying wonderful things about your product. Okay, make sense? And resource influence, and this is often overlooked, is that it's having access to resources. Those who remember when IT was really getting big in the corporate world, remember those IT people had very low titles, but the CEO would run to them and say, I got a problem with my computer. I got a problem. I need you. You're the most important person to me. And so IT people had that because they had resource influence. They didn't have money or title, but they had major influence in companies. Now, a lot of those same people hate Apple because Apple's made things so easy that they're not as needed. But we need to understand what kind of access to resources we have and how we can use that influence to really help influence those people that we want to influence. And then finally, thought influence. And everybody knows Steve Jobs, and we just, it's amazing how society just kind of glosses over the significance of this thought influence. I mean, everyone here was alive when smartphones didn't exist, right? Now everybody has a smartphone. In a matter of time, because this person did that. So my question to you is, what is your invention? What is your thought influence that everybody's going to be doing because you did that? And again, remember what I said about influence? You said, well, I'm not capable. I'm not Steve Jobs. I can't do that. Yes, you can. No one in this room is any less than Steve Jobs. And you need to understand that you have control of influences. You can do what you want to do. And it's critically important that you understand that in this influence context. All right, so so we've talked about how you've been influenced, how you're currently influencing or not influencing. Now, influence management is how do you, what do you do? How do you work on your weaknesses? And so, and the nice thing is this all applies from an individual standpoint and a corporate standpoint. And so I have this simple equation that I put together. One, personality. How many of you have done Myers-Briggs or a personality test? I always tell folks I love Myers-Briggs because that came out the way I wanted to, so it's my favorite. Right? And skills. One of the things we don't do is really take an inventory of what our skills are. And we may have done that when we first got a job 10 years ago, but those skills may not be valuable today. So our skills, am I a good salesperson? Am I a good communicator? Do I write well? Am I great on computers? I'm great on design? We need to do that. And then we'll skip over this one, we'll go to external influence. The other thing that people don't do is they don't understand what their goals are. On a personal level, what are my personal goals? It's not to do a good job. I'm doing this job so I can get somewhere. I want to be, after this, I have a client, Viacom, Nickelodeon's one of my clients, and I'm doing some coaching with some executives, and 2 of the 3 are vice presidents, and they're trying to become senior vice presidents. So we go through this model and say their goal is to become a senior vice president, and a couple, and really both of them, don't have the influence, or not having the right influence on other people. So we're using this model to help them have the right influence so they can become senior vice presidents. So even if you're a CEO of a company, we'll talk about the corporate side, you need to really think about what are your personal goals in being CEO. It's not just enough to make your company $1 million. What is your personal goal to develop? Because business and life are integrally related now. Questions about this? Does this make sense? Okay. So this is the corporate model, and it's a similar thing. So every organization has a culture. I don't care if it's a 1-person organization or a 1,000-person organization, the CEO dictates the culture. And so it's important for you to, one, understand your culture, but also be honest about your capabilities. What can your organization do? What can it do? What can it do? Then the external influence is, what are your goals? Well, we want to sell $1 million more this year. So what you need to think about are, what are your internal influences? Do you need a strategy consultant to come in? Do you need a training program? Do you need to buy a business? Do you need to sell a business? And so as simple as this sounds, people don't do that. And you really need to start doing it. As I said, at Deloitte I learned nothing exists till it's on paper. So you need to write down and say, okay, well this is our culture, these are our capabilities, this is where we want to go, these are the things I need to do over the next year. And it's a simple model, and I've used this model, as I said, to do the Newark and East Orange Mayor's Cabinet Retreat, to work with the New Jersey Retailer of the Year and the Small Business of the Year, Mrs. G. And this simple model really helps folks understand how to get to the next level on an individual basis and on an organizational basis. And so when I have a longer session, what we do is we have people actually work this out and actually work it out on their own, but you guys, you can do that on your own time. All right, so we've done, and I'm doing okay for time, Andrew? Good, perfect. So we've talked about influences, how we've been influenced, how we influence other people, how what we need to do to get the influences we need in life. And this final piece, and if you remember nothing else, this is critical for every human interaction. And so the first is behavioral influence, or the influence to get people to do things. Remember the 6 types of influence I said. You don't need to have all of those types of influence. You really need one of those types of influence in each one of these spheres. So the first is authority influence and resource influence. So if you have authority influence, obviously you can get people to do things. If you have resource influence, you can, like Bill and Melinda Gates, you can get people to do things. That's behavioral influence, or you'll see in the next slide what I call credibility. The trouble is a lot of people, that's all they rely on. That I've been a bank manager for 30 years, so you're going to listen to me because I've been a bank manager. That doesn't work anymore. You need the second piece, which is called rational influence, or getting into people's heads to get them to think a certain way. And that's reputation influence and thought influence, or creativity. So credibility, creativity. So once you have credibility, and the reality is if you don't have credibility, no one's going to listen to you. If they've heard bad things about your product, you can have the best sales pitch in the world, but it's not going to work because you don't have credibility. But the other side is you can't rely on that credibility. You have to do things, you have to get in their mind and say, okay, all right, I'll listen to you. And you got to get them to say, oh, I never thought of it that way. Whether you're interviewing for a job or you're trying to sell a customer. But that's not enough. The third and the most important one, and this is how the influence ties together, is I call emotional influence, or getting people to feel something. And that's belief influence and inspiration influence. You've got to get them to feel something. And the way they feel something is understanding how they've been influenced. And the only way you can understand how they've been influenced is when you understand how you've been influenced. So you see how it ties together? And so when you have credibility, I have a new business, and okay, they've heard, I saw an ad about your company. Great. Well, how are you different than your competitors? Well, we do this. But then what you have to do is meet their particular need, that individual's need. So if I'm trying to sell to everyone in here, you all have different influences, so I need to understand each one of your different needs for me to connect with you. And so often business people don't think about that. They think that everyone thinks the same way. Make sense?
Yes.
And then, if you remember nothing else, this is the simple version of that. And whether you're a spouse or you're a girlfriend, boyfriend, or your employees, every successful human interaction has all 3 of these. Every failed human interaction is missing one or more of them. Either you didn't have credibility, so they didn't listen to you, or you had credibility and you didn't get them thinking a different way. And so I encourage all my audiences to practice this. When you go home, doesn't matter today, just practice it and think about an interaction with somebody. And think, if they listen to you, why did they listen to you? Well, they had all 3. If they don't listen to you, figure out how you can get what they're missing. And then finally, what I do, and I'll send Andrew the slides, and we can, is that if you don't have authority or resource or reputation or thought or belief or inspiration, these are just some tricks that you can use to get each one of them. So with that, and we had a little bit of time, and I think we're on time. These are some books that you may have heard of. How to Win Friends and Influence People is probably the best-selling book of all time. It's 90 years old. Influence, Science, and Practice, where the author is a professor who says, I want to, I'm a sucker for salespeople. I want to prevent salespeople from influencing me to buy, and he talks about that. Influence Without Authority is one of the first books to talk about people who weren't CEOs and how they have influence. So, with that, any quick questions before I think we And again, and one of the things I love is that I love doing this because I get people to think differently about themselves, about their business, and that's why it's not as much motivation as really giving you a tool. So when you leave here, hopefully you can really think about those things and really apply them in your personal life, but also your business life. Questions, comments? Yeah.
On the slide that you talked about, PSIE, I think it was, personality was the P part of that. How do you, in the context of intelligent influence, change your own personal personality? That's very difficult.
Well, but you don't have to. See, the beauty is, and I'm sorry, I didn't give the example. The example I like to use is this guy named Warren Buffett. You know Warren Buffett?
Yes.
Probably the most successful CEO
Yes.
in the world now. Warren Buffett is a heavy, heavy introvert. Obviously very skilled financially. Wanted to be a CEO. Anybody know what he did? What his internal influence was to become who he is? He's still an introvert. He didn't change. He absorbed Dale Carnegie courses. I think he taught them, he read them, he absorbed them, and that was enough. He's still an introvert. But when he needs to be on stage, he can do that. And this internal influence, he knew. So you don't have to change your personality. One of my problems with personality things is that people feel relegated. They say, well, I'm an introvert, so I'll never be a CEO. And a lot of people, a lot of consultants use that personality test and say, well, these are the jobs you're fit for. You got to be an engineer in the back office. You can't. No. And you always remind them about the Warren Buffett, the Buffett idea. So that's a great question. Any other questions? I think we're time. Yeah.
Yeah, so thinking of managing when you're working with a board, and there are multiple personalities, can you speak to that? Because I can get it with the individual, but when you have to adapt to work with so many different personalities and needs, how will this work when you have to influence up?
So you've been in my school board meetings, obviously. So you know that's a school board. That's one of the hardest things that I can get a corporate board. It's one of the hardest things because everybody thinks they're an educational expert. But what you want to do is take the time to sit down and ask that question. Who are the biggest influences in your life? Of each individual one, develop that relationship. Because what that does two things. One, it gives you information, but two, it changes your relationship. And so the next time, because what happens so often is people are nasty in these board meetings because they think that you don't believe what they believe. And so once you kind of unpack that relationship, then you can really talk about common ground. So one of the things every time I do strategic planning, like I did with the mayor and others, I go through this process. And at first people say, what does this have to do with strategic planning? It's amazing when you do this, we can do mission statements in a half hour. Because it gets away a lot of the nonsense and realize it's all about influence. Why are we here? And when you learn the people around you, you realize you're all there for the same reason. And so it really is a great way. So I actually love conflict. I love taking this to conflict because it's a way. So if two people are arguing, I say, well, who do you think were the influences in her life to get her to think that way? And then you have a great discussion. So with that, I think we're at time. I want to thank you all very much. I hope it was helpful.
Thank you, Dale. That was tremendous. Definitely influenced me, and just hopefully.
At the head of each table, I have some of my business cards. So if you didn't get one, take one, please.
Yeah. Great. So thanks again, Dale. Hopefully everybody's thinking a little bit differently. Challenge yourself. You got the weekend to spend some time. And hopefully you'll come back out next week with a new perspective.
If you want the book, it's on Amazon.
Oh, if you want the book, it's on Amazon, but even better than that, we have several copies here that you can buy and get them signed by Dale in the back, as well as we have several copies of my brother's book in the back as well. So you can take one home with you and check it out this weekend and even get more in depth than what he's talking about. I'm just here to wrap things up. Thank you for coming out. We always appreciate it. Hopefully you're taking something home that's a little bit different. We don't have a business card drawing today because we forgot we didn't get them, but sorry about that. But our next Power Breakfast is going to be January 25th. As you leave, we try to recycle the name tags. We want to make sure everybody has a name tag. It makes it easier to network and connect. So just leave them on the desk as you leave. We'd appreciate it. We still do have the workshop, so definitely you're welcome to stay. It's going to be great, just like what Dale presented. It's going to be a long ways for your personal success. And that's going to start in about 15 minutes. Please stay, network, connect, and we got plenty of food left too, so you're welcome to have a second. Thanks for coming out.